The President. The Council now resumes. Mr. Adrian Ho. Thank you, President. I would like to thank Mr. Lee Chun-keung for moving this motion on addressing the needs of the middle class. In the last Council meeting, when the Secretary for Financial and Services Treasury made a response to the oral question, he mentioned about the one-off relief measures, including providing tax deductions and allowance to salaries, taxpayers, and rebate of rates. When I talked to my friends in the middle class, we talked about e-vouchers. They told us that they have to pay taxes that is higher and in amount more than the e-consumption vouchers. And they have to pay a lot of taxes with view welfare benefits. In fact, the middle class does not have the support from the government. And because they can be self-reliant, that is why the government seems not to take care of their needs and doesn't understand their difficulties. So I hope that the government can roll out measures to help the middle class so that their needs will not be ignored. People living in Hong Kong have to pay much expenses. Middle class cannot apply for public rental housing, but some are even ineligible to apply for home ownership scheme flats. They can only purchase expensive private property, and when they cannot come up with the down payment, they have to pay rent. And the rent is very expensive. They have to take care of their families and they have to pay mortgages or rent. When this is the case, how can the middle class plan for the future? I hope that the government can understand the needs of the middle class more. I think that the government can allow the middle class don't have to pay the provisional tax. I would like to thank the government for putting out this tax deductions for domestic rents deduction so that families who do not own a flat can benefit. I hope that the government can raise the deductions for domestic rents from $100,000 to $115,000 to help families who need to rent a flat that do not own one. To meet the high expenses for living in Hong Kong, middle class have to work while they have to take care of their families. Most of them hire foreign domestic helpers to take care of their families. So when we have tax deductions, it will help this middle class families to take care of their parents. But we don't have this tax deductions for employing foreign domestic helpers yet. There are 340,000 foreign domestic helpers in Hong Kong. I hope that the government can introduce this tax deductions for employing foreign domestic helper to alleviate the burden of the middle class. Now, I would like to talk about the relationship between supporting middle class and the aging population. The middle class plays a very important role in this regard. I hope that the government can teach the members of the public how to invest so that their burden can be eased and prepare for retirement and take care of themselves so that they can age in place and community. President, I so speak in support of the original motion and the amendment.
Thank you, President. Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Lee Chun-keung for moving this amendment so I can tell you about the pressure felt by the middle class. For middle class, you probably have in mind people in suits, those going on holidays and eating at hotels. Now, if you talk to friends in the middle class, they will tell you that, well, if you look at their IG account, it seems that they're having a good life. But actually, they only know how they struggle Now, in the past few years, the economy was good, so they were able to manage and they could still support their parents and the children. They could actually just barely manage, but now, recent years, the economy is not as good, so they don't dare to spend money. They try to save as much as they could. And of course, then it's a vicious circle. Business is not doing so well, but still they have to pay their mortgage, they have to pay for medical expenses, they have to pay for the education expenses of the children, and then and that's another green bomb that they will have to detonate soon with the municipal waste charge. Now, this is nothing new. When I was district councillor, voters told me something similar. The middle class say that they don't get any welfare benefits, and then they are under immense pressure trying to make ends meet, and then they have to pay tax, and then if they and then they have to pay for the foreign domestic helper. They don't get any tax allowance for that. Now, more than half of about half of our population is considered middle class, but then their needs are always overlooked. For example, with a electricity tariff or other waivers, usually is for the grassroots sector. So what can we do to help the middle class? How can we help them to at least breathe a sigh of relief? And so I would like to share with you the aspirations of the middle class. They told me in person. First, they really want to have child healthcare vouchers, because young children always have to go and see a doctor. I don't know yet because my child is still very young, but they say that when the children are 4 or 5, they often have to go and see a doctor, even though there are various medical schemes, immunization scheme and so on. Still, children, are weak at that age, and they often have to see a doctor. And also, they need to go see a dentist too if children have problems with their teeth, and they may have to do a surgery within time frame. And then if they go for government service, the wait may be 3 or 5 years, and that's too late. So they have to go to see a private dentist. And here we're talking about some $50,000-$60,000. And the mother told me that during that age, children may not just have problems with their teeth, but also with their eyes. If there are child healthcare vouchers, that would help a bit. And then for middle class families, often both parents have to work, and they hope that the tax allowances for mothers and fathers could be counted separately. And then because usually one spouse may have a high income, the other has less, but then the one with less income won't get tax allowance. It can't be right. And then they have to also consider expenses spent on supporting parents. Now, the government always encouraging people to retire in the Greater Bay Area. Now, the dependent parents may not stay in Hong Kong for more than 180 days, so they are not entitled to the dependent parent allowance. But then, even if parents don't live in Hong Kong, doesn't mean that children don't have to contribute to their expenses. So what can we do? Can we have some flexibility here? Now, many middle class friends tell me that it's not that they don't want to have children, they're just giving dogs. It's just that there is too heavy a burden on them, and they have worked so hard studying and getting qualified, and then they don't want to have to take up another burden supporting children. So you have to help them make some savings, and then the whole society actually will again light up. So you have to find ways to help the middle class get some relief. Reverend Peter Kuhn. Now, the middle class always rely on themselves. They work long hours to make a living. It's because they want to have upward mobility and improve the life of their family, and they want their next generation to have a better environment for development. But then there is increasingly less opportunities to upward mobility, and then the economy is declining, and the prices are high. So many businesses have downsized, and so many of the middle class don't have promotion opportunities, and then their income is not increasing as much as before. So many in the middle class choose to go for downward mobility, they have to go for downward mobility, and their quality of living suffers. In fact, the middle class always been the backbone for the economic growth of Hong Kong. But the one who pay much taxes, but they don't get any welfare benefits. They always feel that they're neglected by the government. And so that's why there are more and more grievances among the middle class. And of course, that won't bode well for the long-term stability of society. Now, this government makes it a priority task to address the housing issue. This is also where the burden is heaviest for the middle class too. Now, property prices kept soaring up. Now, the grassroots sectors will have housing benefits from the government, but then the middle class don't get any help, and they're the hardest hit. The 2021 census shows that among households who have to pay mortgage for private housing, the mortgage to the medium mortgage payment is $13,500, an increase of 30% compared to a few years ago. And then for outstanding mortgage period, it's gone up from 17 years to 20 years. And then the mortgage amounts also reached a peak since 2001. It shows that many people have to spend most of their income on mortgage payments. And that's why mortgage periods becoming increasingly long. It shows that the middle class have an increasing burden either paying mortgage or renting a property. Now, there is not enough subsidized housing supply yet, and that will be addressed later, but not now. So it's a pressing issue. I hope that the government could consider extending the tax deduction period to 20 years for mortgage interest payment expenses in the next budget. And then the amount could also be increased from $100,000 to $150,000. As for tax deduction to domestic rent, or if there could even be a tax allowance for land rent or government rent. Now, many of the middle class have to support their parents, and then many parents also spend much on help on their children's education and training. Now, children's expenses cost about 20% of household expenditure. So for a typical middle-class household, after all the expenses, there's nothing much left. So they may seem to lead a good life, but actually only they know how they're struggling to make ends meet. So for dependent parent allowance and other allowances, they should be increased. And also the education allowance should also be increased from $25,000. Now, we need to take care of the middle class. We need to know what they need, and if we and that is an important element to ensure social stability. So, apart from paying attention to industrial development and economic development, the government must also pay attention to the needs of the middle class. There must be suitable policies for the middle class so they will continue to contribute to better Hong Kong. So I speak in support of all the motion and the amendment. Mr. Benson, look, thank you. I thank Mr. Lee Chun-keung for moving this motion and for Mr. Frankie YICK for moving his amendment. Many in the middle class complain they are the one who have to pay tax, but they don't enjoy any welfare benefits. But the middle class mostly don't mind. They just keep working quietly, and they are the main contributors to our economic growth and social stability. But then there have been, major changes in the community because of the COVID pandemic, and then the economy is declining. The stock market is not performing either. So the middle class is suffering. And so we can't just ask them to rely on themselves anymore. In fact, household income has been declining over the past few years. The household expenditure survey shows that For 2018, those earning $30,000 to $60,000, that's about 16%. But then by 2023, that was 29.6%. Now it's dropped to 28.2% in 2023. Now the middle class faces various challenges, and that may affect social stability, because we're seeing rifts in the middle class, in the middle sector of the community. Young people don't get upward mobility. So that's why the government needs to have forceful measures to support the middle class. We need to make sure that the social ladder is kept and then upward mobility is kept. But then we've been saying so much about the middle class, but what exactly is the middle class? There is not yet an official definition for that. Say, in terms of the income brackets and so on, there is not yet a definition. Now, there are some senior officials earning over $300,000 claiming themselves to be the middle class. And then there are others who say those who earn $20,000 are the fringe middle class. Of course, we're talking about a huge income difference here. In terms of the day-to-day expenses and their lifestyle, of course, it's very different, across the range. So that's why the government needs to do studies, and then the government will be able to give suitable support to the middle class. First of all, the government could first give an administrative definition to the middle class. There should be a line drawn somewhere. It's a middle class line similar to the poverty line. Perhaps they could consider individual income, household income, asset values, and so on. Those are quantitative indicators. And then they could also consider their education level, the post they hold, and so on. We're not doing an academic study. It's just that we need to have some administrative standards so we could give support to the middle class who experience difficulties. For example, the HYAB has recently come up with a dashboard for the young people. So can there be a dashboard for the middle class as well? So the public and the government will have a good idea of what the middle class is and what needs they have, and then we can respond to that. Now, the well-being of the middle class is important. This is an important factor to maintain our social stability. So the government has to consider how we could formulate middle-class policy, and it should be at the bureau level. Maybe there could be a commission or a committee that's responsible for taking forward policies on for the middle class. And thirdly, for the middle class, financial support is most practical. Now, the BPA will put forward a series of suggestions in the budget consultation on how we could help the middle class. I hope the government and the financial secretary will take on board our views. Thank you. I speak in support of the motion and the amendment.
Dr. Priscilla Leung. President, I speak in support of the original motion and the amendment moved. I remember that when I spoke in the Council in 2009, I called for the government to increase or rather lower the threshold for legal aid for the middle class. I have a lot of personal experience on this. In one autumn, I was approached by a middle class person. He knew before me in the city university. He said he was caught in a litigation, but he was not well off enough to hire a lawyer. Now, during the Lehman Brothers incident, there were hundreds of thousands of middle-class people who could not afford a lawyer to represent them to fight for their welfare. In our society, the middle class is facing a huge risk to become a property-deprived class. We have to arrest this trend. In 2013, at the time, John Tsang was the financial secretary. He said that if you watch French movie, listen to French music, and if you enjoy a cup of coffee, then you are living the life of a middle class. Professor Loy Tai Lok said that for to qualify as a middle class, you should be earning an income between $25,000 to $50,000. But it also depends on the size of your flat, your purchasing power, and your lifestyle. There are some occupations with a full middle class workforce which are just earning $25,000 per month. Now, for those who work in the media sector, their starting income is very low. But I think they are thinking like middle class people. It's just questionable whether their income can support a middle class lifestyle. There were also senior officials who said that they belong to the middle class despite their income of $300,000 per month. There are even people earning $1 million per year claiming to be middle class. Now, for the middle class, they spend a lot on medical health care as well as on fashion. They are not saving much, so when they retire, they are at a very poorly condition. There are a lot of baby boomers who have been earning $100,000 to $150,000, but because of personal unfortune or the economic situation, they have to sell their flags, and they are always at the worry of losing their homes. Now we have 15 to 30% people in the middle class group who can be qualified as the poor middle class. The middle class is aging, and because of the poor economic situation, many of them have become unemployed. So starting from 2008, I called for the government to introduce a transitional scheme for the unemployed. Now, $1 billion should be put into this program. Now, there are people who used to belong to the middle class who have lost their job, and then because of their inability to transition and upgrade, they may commit suicide. And also because of their assets, they are not qualified for legal aid, and they are not qualified for a PRH flag. Now, I hope you won't cancel the $2 transport subsidy for the retired. You should keep it. It will incentivize retired middle class to do voluntary work or work part-time without worrying about prohibitive transportation costs. This is a long-term investment rather than a benefit. I know some middle class friends, they have their own income, but they don't want to use the $2 scheme because they are proud. This is the mindset of baby boomers. I hope the government will understand their thinking and help them to continue to contribute to society. And for those who can't afford to retire, give them more help. Thank you. Mr. Frankie YICK. President, the middle class people give a perception that they are very free. After the 3-year epidemic, the middle class is living much more poorly. Everything is more expensive. Home mortgage is expensive. They need to pay for the care of their children and parents. The pressure is immense. There is not a universal definition for middle class. Different institutions and organizations adopt various indexes for middle class, including assets, income, education, entertainment, and occupation. But there is a consensus that the middle class is the cornerstone of a stable society. For a society to be healthy, middle class should be the main pillar of society. However, we are having a shrinking middle class population. In 2023, in the third quarter, there were 1,800,000 households earning between $30,000 and $35,000, a drop of 2,200 compared with last year. The absolute income earned by the middle class has shrunk a lot. Middle class claims to be the sandwich class. That is, they are caught between. They are falling through the gaps. They are not as well off as the rich class, and they are not like the grassroots sector, which receives a lot of support from the government. They are earning a bit more than the grassroots people, but they are spending more than them. They pay a lot of tax, but they receive little in terms of benefits. The DAB always urges the government to offer more help to the middle class, but the government has refused to be proactive in alleviating the stress faced by middle class because of a tight budget. Many middle class people are poor. Their expendable income is low. Between 2019 and 2020, if you look at the general household survey, for households living in private housing, the expenditure is 44%, compared with PRH households, theirs are just 11.8%. It shows that there are lots of burdens borne by the middle class, and their living quality is not as high as expected. We need to help them. There are several suggestions. Many middle-class households hire foreign domestic helpers to care for their families. However, a foreign domestic helper's quality is questionable, and many agents are overcharging them. The DAB urges the government to set up an authority to monitor the imports, training, as well as quality of foreign domestic helpers. We should prevent job hopping and prevent agencies from transferring the cost on the households. We shouldn't overly rely on a single source of foreign domestic helpers in terms of countries. Now, to save time, many middle-class households would take their children to see a private doctor at a private clinics, but the charge is expensive. It may cost thousands of dollars per month. It poses a lot of pressure on the family's budget. Now, through public-private partnership in medical health care, we can alleviate the burden. We should fully subsidize children qualified for the vaccination program to receive medical health care in the public sector. The government should consider waiving the stamp duty for first-time home buyers with a ceiling of $10 million. We should also increase the supply of sales-subsidized flats to alleviate the burden of the middle class. An expansion of this middle-class population shows that the society is moving forward. Our middle class is facing a crisis. We have to pay attention to the needs and give them the help they deserve. Thank you. Mr. Gary Chen. Thank you, President. I thank Mr. Lee Chun-keung for moving this motion on addressing the needs of the middle class so that this council can have a serious discussion on how to better help them. Over the past few years, the government has been saying that we have to enhance the sense of happiness of the people, but it's easier said than done. This is a group of people with heavy tax burden, long working hours, and immense pressure. How can we make them happier? This is not an easy task. So this is my topic today. We have to enhance their sense of happiness. Many people are going north to spend the money during weekends. Well, this is the phenomena among many middle-class people as well. I see a lot of colleagues here going north and shop for groceries in the supermarkets in Shenzhen. Why is that? Because the CP value is high. You only need to pay a bit and enjoy and get much to enjoy. Now, it's the same for the middle class. If you only have $500 to spend over weekends, well, it may not cover a meal for everyone in your family. But with the same amount of money, you can get a lot in Shenzhen. So besides the consumption experience, the financial burden faced by the middle class is huge. Well, if you are with the same amount of money, you can get much more in Shenzhen. That's why many middle class people are spending the money in the north. Sense of happiness and sense of gain is not something lofty. This is something real. You have to begin with small things. In recent years, there are measures to support the middle class. For example, the $20,000 red pockets to encourage childbearing by the middle class. The middle class has always been a group which is adverse to the idea of childbearing. Now, many people, many colleagues in my party are also attracted by this idea. This is Edmund Wong. He wants to get $60,000 by giving birth to 3 children, but I have yet to hear good news from him. Or is it because of his personal aspirations, or is it because of his profession? Well, I will not comment on his personal choice, but it may have to do with his profession. He is a public accountant. He knows that $60,000 will not be sufficient for rearing 3 children. Now, 10 years ago, it cost $4 million. Nowadays, it costs $6 million. So as a CPA, he will definitely not go for 3 children simply because of the $60,000 red pocket. So besides the so-called financial incentives, more importantly, we need to show support to the middle class in childbearing, not just money. Of course, in the amendments, there are calls for progressive child tax allowance, education voucher scheme, and so on. These are good stuff, but they are not enough. We need a whole society support. The policies must convince the middle class that childbearing is not a stressful thing in terms of looking for a school and looking for a doctor. You need to convince the middle class that the entire society is supporting them in child rearing. So this is just an example. There are a lot more aspects that the council must work with the government to offer more support and care to the middle class so that they can live happier. Thank you. Ms. Connie Lam.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank Mr. Lee Chun-keung on moving this motion on addressing the needs of the middle class and the amendment proposed by Mr. Frankie YICK. Middle class is the major driving force of our society, but in terms of supporting the middle class, the government hasn't done much. The middle class families have always paid a large amount of tax but enjoyed few welfare benefits. With limited income, they have to pay mortgage and rents. As a result, the middle class is faced with a huge financial burden. Currently, we don't have a precise definition for the middle class, but we can make reference to the indicators set out by the OECD. They set the middle class as household earning between 75% and 200% of the median national income. For Hong Kong, in Q3, the median household income is $30,000. So if we apply to that to Hong Kong, the middle class in Hong Kong is households earning $220,500 to $60,000. I suggest that the government make use of this indicator to define the middle class in Hong Kong and formulate relevant measures to cater to the needs of the families, including housing, welfare, and marriage support. I also support the amendments and the proposals, and we should establish a middle class commission to review the policies or measures relating to the middle class from a high-level perspective and lay down an indicator and publish relevant statistics in relation to the definition. I care about the grassroots families, and there are middle class in my constituency. So today I would like to call upon the government to provide more support to the middle class. We should not just provide welfare to the grassroots families, but also the middle class. We should review various statistics every year and adjust the tax rates. We have a fiscal deficit this year. That is why we should raise the child allowance. We should also adjust other measures for middle class. We should raise the deductions or allowance for dependent parent and grandparent. We should also allow for tax deductions for employing for domestic helpers. Middle class families have their parents to take care of, and they have to cater to their children. If these families do not have a foreign domestic helper, it's difficult for them to take care of their families. I am not married because I find it very difficult to support my parents while taking care of children. There are a number of women who came to me for help in relation to marriage. I hope that the government can put in more resources to support the middle class in this regard. They need support for marriage and divorce matters as well. Undersecretary, I hope that the government can support the middle class in terms of marriage as well. Also, on children and teenagers with special education needs, this is the problem faced by middle class families as well. For education vouchers and carers allowance and subsidy, they are only usually for the grassroots families. So what should the middle class do? Can a household with $100,000 per month of income support themselves? I think that the government should provide special education voucher to middle class families with children of special needs and provide child allowance and newborn bonus to families with children. $20,000 is not enough. Apart from the areas that I mentioned in relation to financial support, we should also care about the carers. Undersecretary, I've mentioned this number of times. The policy is usually tilted in favor of grassroots families. We don't have much support for the middle class. I hope that the government can support the sandwich class in Hong Kong. We have 230,000 middle-class people in Hong Kong. We should provide more support to the carers in the middle class. They are faced with immense stress, and there is incidence of people committing suicide. We don't want to see more tragedies coming in 2024. We hope that the Housing Bureau, the Health Bureau, and the Labor and Welfare Bureau will support the middle class. Thank you. Dr. Chow Man Kwong. Thank you, President. Many grassroots families want to move upward to become a middle class, but when they become middle class, they have to face with a number of financial stress, including paying taxes and so on. They have to take care of their families and recently, the stock market and the property market of Hong Kong is going downward with high interest rate. Middle class who need to pay mortgage have to pay a high interest rate. And they have to take care of their children and send them to schools as well as their parents. All these expenses are very expensive that pose immense pressure on them, not to mention having more children. Now we are undergoing this budget consultation for the next budget. So I think that it's timely for this motion to be moved by Mr. Lee. The middle class is faced with childbirth, taking care of their parents, and various issues. The government is aware of the low birth rate in Hong Kong currently, and in the policy address, they have put out measures, including the newborn baby bonus of $20,000 and also domestic rent deduction is put in place. Compared to the previous terms of the government, this term of government has done more in terms of support for the middle class. The middle class need to take care of their children. In terms of child allowance, each child born can enjoy a tax allowance of $130,000. and the tax allowance is double on the year when the child is born. I am a parent myself. The expenses incurred for a child during the first 3 years when they are born, it's very high. We have to pay for milk powder and we have to pay for nursery. To raise a child, $4 million is not enough. Now the cost is $6 million. I hope that the child allowance can be extended to the first 3 years of when the child is born, and we should also provide tax deductions for employing foreign domestic helpers. We should inject vibrancy in the society. Now children are faced with immense competition as well. They have to fight for a place in the primary school, and they have to take extracurricular activities. In the 2023 statistics, there are vacancies of school places in international school of about 5,627. This is not a good thing because it shows that the middle class is either having their children changed to public school or aided schools, or they have left Hong Kong. And also there are teachers leaving schools and at a higher rate than new teachers joining the force. It's not the case that with a low birth rate, we don't need that many teachers. It actually affects the quality of education. That is why we, the G19, propose the raising of tax allowance for schools education. We should not be stringent on education. We need to let the middle class know that the government care about them. Every child has the responsibility to take care of their parent. Even when they don't live with their parents, it does not mean that they don't take care of them. We all understand that the average household size of property is about 172 square feet. It's rare for children to be living in the same district with their parents. I think, well, now there is a restrictions on the dependent parent allowance that they should be living together. Not all Hong Kong people live in a villa. It's impossible for them to just stay with their parents. So I think for this restrictions of dependent parent allowance, it should be relaxed to living in the same district with the parents to alleviate the financial burden of the middle class and make them more willing to take care of their parents. Mr. Robert Lee. Thank you, President. I speak in support of the motion proposed by Mr. Lee Chun-keung. Addressing the needs of the middle class is a subject that we all concern. We don't have a universal definition for the middle class, but according to the OECD definition, a middle class is defined as households earning between 75% and 200% of the median national income. According to the latest median household income of Hong Kong, it stands at $30,000. So it means that 1 million households are qualified for middle class. For professionals, including doctors, architects, accountants, they are seen as middle class. They contribute to the economy greatly. But with the fluctuation of economic situation and the pandemic, the Hong Kong's economy has not fully recovered. With high interest rate, the middle class is faced with immense financial pressure. According to the government statistics, about 40% of middle-class households spend 40% on housing. But for grassroots family, their expenses on rent accounts for about just 10% of their income. Apart from high housing expenses, the middle class has to pay for the education of their children and save for continuing education. They have to take care of the families and prepare for retirement. So I think that the government should provide in the budget a short-term tax reliefs for the middle class. I think that the government should allow for tax rebate and raise concession. I agree with what Mr. Lee said, that we should provide tax deduction for the expenses of employing foreign domestic helpers and review the restrictions and amount on dependent parent or dependent grandparent allowance. I think that the government should help the middle class raise their income. I'm not talking about cash handouts, but through investment, the government can enhance their revenue. According to the new capital investment entrance scheme, the interested parties have to invest in Hong Kong. So I think that the government can allow capable middle class participate in the proposed combination of investment so that they have another way to support the INT development of Hong Kong and make use of or grasp the opportunities of the Greater Bay Area's development. I think that the government should inject funding in the portfolio so that members of the public can enjoy the fruits of economic prosperity. I think that we should also review the MPF scheme so that employees can create accounts on their own so that they can make their own investment or buy ETF. I think that also the voluntary contribution of MPF should be tax deductible. For voluntary contribution or MPF, they are usually only able to be taken out after retirement. When we have this capital in the market, it will revitalize the stock market, and through education, the middle class can enhance their portfolio. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy Wong. President, some members mentioned that according to the OECD definition, the middle-class households account for about 40% of all households in Hong Kong. Now, the middle class have been working hard, quietly, and then they have to pay housing expenses, whether they pay a mortgage or rent, and then they have to pay for their children's education. So that's why I and the DBA have all along asked the government to give pay more attention to the middle class. So the DAB supports the original motion of Mr. Lee Chun-keung, but then on some of the amendments of Mr. Frankie YICK, we have reservations. In 2023 to 24, the recurrent expenditure of the government will go up by about 3.3% slightly. And we see that for livelihood-related policy areas, such as healthcare, social welfare, education, the government is pouring in immense resources. They account for about 60% of recurrent expenditure. Now, some among the middle class may not see that such spending is on them. But then when they take part in arts and cultural activities and so on, these are often funded by the government. So it's not true that the government's recurrent spending is all on the grassroots sector. Well, in recent years, our economy is not doing so well and it's not recovering as expected. Middle class who are paying mortgage, seeing high interest rate hike as well, and then commodity prices, service prices all going up, and then the government has a huge fiscal deficit. That's why it said it's going to make savings and generate more in revenue. And they'd have to consider various fees for services, so on. So the government, of course, needs to consider also the plight of the middle class. We don't want the grievances to build up, because this will become a hidden risk for the government if people are unhappy. Now, the government needs to do all it can to invigorate our economy. The DAB has always suggested some night economy activities, and then we need to boost our receiving capacity and service standard for the tourism industry. And then the individual visit scheme should be opened up to more cities on the mainland. We should also resume multiple entry individual visit endorsements for Shenzhen residents. At the same time, we need to step up publicity in other parts of Asia to bring more visitors here. And then we have to make sure the Northern Metropolis and the Hetao Cooperation Zone are developed as planned. Because there will be new growth points for Hong Kong, and I believe when these projects together with G-Bay development and so on will bring more income to the middle class. And then the middle class will have a sense of gain and happiness. Now, in Mr. Frankie Yick's amendments, there are several measures in support of the middle class. Now, about adjusting salaries tax downwards and lowering the marginal rate, well, I think there's need for wide consensus among the different sectors in the community before we proceed with that. Now, the government's facing a huge fiscal deficit. There is a declining general revenue, so maybe it's not the best time to make such major reforms. As for the education voucher scheme, that involves primary and secondary schools as well as direct subsidy schools and private schools, that will have an impact on the ecosystem in the education sector. So we need to consider very carefully whether we're putting public resources to the best use. Because we have any adequate consideration and studies, it's hard for us to support these measures. That's why we have reservations on these 2 points, and so we will abstain from voting on his amendment. Thank you. Mr. Rock Chen. President, the middle class has always been the backbone of our economy. But then the COVID pandemic has brought about some impact, and then the stock market is declining. There is high inflation and high interest rates, so the middle class is facing a serious plight. Compared to grassroots sectors, the government is not giving so much support to the middle class. The government has explained before that there is not a standard definition for the middle class, so it's hard to provide targeted measures as a result. Now, some members said yesterday and today that according to the OECD, there is a definition for the middle class. If we go by the OECD's definition, that then many people in the middle class have an income that exceeds the HOS income limit, so they have no choice but to buy private housing. So that's why I support Mr. Lee Chun-keung's motion that we need to find ways to help lessen the burden of the middle class. And we also need to help the middle class to have a happy home and enjoy upward mobility. Now, the government has come up with the a loan scheme so applicants could get a low interest loan to have down payment for buying private housing. There were some 80,000 applications under that scheme. That's a sandwich class loan scheme. Now, many in the middle class are still not able to buy a property because they don't have enough down payment probably. So the government should consider resuming the Home Starter Loan scheme. So for those who don't have sufficient down payment but who have stable income, they could then get resistance to buy their first home. I also support Mr. Frankie Yick's amendment to introduce a FDH tax allowance. So each taxpayer could enjoy tax allowance for one FDH, and the allowance should be based on the minimum wage of FDH. And then for a child education tax allowance, and also relaxing the restrictions on dependent parent and dependent grandparent allowance, I also support that. About introducing, lowering the salaries tax and marginal rate, and also introducing an education voucher scheme. These are long and tax allowance for children's education. These are long-term policy issues. I'm not against them, but then there are wide implications, especially if we talk about adjusting the tax rate. Now, the government is recording huge fiscal deficit every year, and then we have a relatively narrow tax base. So that's why there's need for comprehensive studies and analysis on Mr. Frankie Yick's amendments in this respect. As for the education voucher scheme, it will affect the whole education system and where students would go for the different types of schools. That's why we need to consider this idea also very carefully and weigh the pros and cons. That while these two proposals deserve careful consideration, but then we have to wait till there is wide public consultation and consensus is reached before we proceed with them. Apart from government support, the middle class also wants to see that we have a vibrant and diversified economy with upward mobility, because the middle class want to work for a better life for themselves and their family by using their own skills and expertise. So that's why we need to promote diversity in economic development. We need to develop various industries with competitive edge, for example, financial industries, cultural and creative industries, cross-boundary e-commerce business, and so on. So we could provide more opportunities for the middle class, I so speak. Mr. Lee. President, Hong Kong is now in a new era of advancing from stability to prosperity. The SL government has done much to develop the economy, improve people's livelihood, and they have achieved certain results. Now, in this new era, we all believe that it's most important to gain support from the public. And how do we gain support from the middle class? I think that's the most important. The middle class is an important stabilizing force. Their well-being and happiness have everything to do with the fate of Hong Kong. So that's why I've always cared much about the middle class. And we've done various studies and surveys to learn about the thoughts of the middle class. Now, about 10 years ago, I enrolled into the Tsinghua University. My PhD thesis was about the middle class. I worked 10 years really hard, and I am now preparing my thesis. I hope later on I'll be able to publish my thesis and so I can share it with you. I only have 5 minutes. Of course, I'm not able to share with you my own findings, my own research findings. But still, I hope we will all contribute to gaining the support of the middle class. I would like to thank Mr. Lee Chun-keung for his motion. He's expressed his concern about the middle class on many different occasions in the council. But of course, it's not just the Liberal Party. Actually, it's a cross-party consensus that we should pay more attention to the middle class. We agree we need to support the middle class in the broad directions mentioned by in the original motion. But for some of the amendments, as my colleagues just explained, we have some reservations. We need to do more studies. Now, okay, this government has done much to help to boost the economy, but it seems that it's not doing much enough on trying to gain the support of the middle class. I remember last time the Liberal Party moved a motion and they suggested tax deductions or support for the middle class. At the time, it was Mr. Christopher Hui, the Secretary for the Financial Services Treasury, who gave a response. This time, he's also leading. It's the FSTB leading this response. But still, if we talk about the middle class, the focus should not be about financial services and the Treasury Bureau, really, because many say the middle class is the sandwich class, and we can all see why. You're just adjusting the tax systems or giving them some financial support. Well, that's not enough to gain the support of the middle class. If you want the middle class to give you support again, it's all about this is actually an important aspect of this new era of moving from stability to prosperity. So I must urge the government not to just again make the FSTB lead this debate on this issue. You don't think that you just give some tax or deductions of financial incentives and then you'll gain the support of middle class. It's not far more than that. So I hope the government will do a study. Well, as to whether we should set up a commission or whatever, that's something we could discuss further. But if every time when there's a debate on the middle class, the FSTB leads the response, then I think you are casting too narrow a vision. Now, with the anti-extradition campaign, that should help us to see more clearly the needs of the middle class. First of all, we know many middle class families have chosen to leave Hong Kong, and then that's the first point. Second point. There's some survey covering China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and Malaysia. They try to see how the middle class contributes to the development of their countries, the places' economy. They find that for those aged between 18 and 45 in Hong Kong, they score the least among all these other places. That means the middle class is not very much motivated. The property market and the stock market is not doing well. The economy is not doing well, and and also the voting voter turnout is also low among the middle class, so they're not keen to vote. So that's why we need to do something to gain the support of the middle class. But then from the survey, and we can see that the middle class is still have much grievances. Thank you.
Mr. Scott Leung. Thank you, President. In the mainland, there are some KOLs saying that the middle class has become poor. I think it is the same message sent by Mr. Lee Chun-keung in the motion. Many middle class has become the grassroots. After the 3-year epidemic, the recovery is not as robust as expected. The wealth of the middle class has shrunk. Many middle class has been venting their anger on the internet. Now, this is a warning sign for the government. The middle class is the cornerstone of a stable society. They are the stabilizer of the economy because they have the resources to take up social obligations. They even engage in philanthropic or charitable causes. And they are also the main driving force behind consumption in this city. They are also a major source of entrepreneurs. More than 90% of our corporations are micro enterprises with less than 10 employees. The entrepreneurs are the middle class. Middle class are important in driving innovation as well as diversification of our economy. That explains why they are the stabilizer of our economy. Now, the middle class is expected to be able to address their own needs. As a result, the government tends to neglect the needs of the middle class. Middle class has a house, a car, children, and even pets. Well, it seems a good life, but the burden is huge. They pay a lot of tax, but they enjoy few benefits. Their plights are even worse than that of the grassroots, and they deserve more attention. Well, these are my suggestions. In terms of mortgage payments or rental payments, this makes up a lot of their family expenditure, especially for those who are home owners. Mortgage payments is stressful. Now, there are progressive mortgage payment schemes in the market where interest payment is lower. Well, this is a good idea. The government can encourage the market to introduce more similar products so that young families have more options in home purchase. Now, the middle class is paying a lot of tax and enjoy few benefits. To alleviate their burdens, I support the measures proposed by the Liberal Party, including expanding the tax band, increasing the tax allowance for dependent parents and children, as well as a child tax allowance. The middle class is facing a crisis, but by relaxing tax allowance, we can encourage the middle class to increase their expenditure, and in the end, we would end up boosting the economy. Now, I support the idea of the $20,000 newborn baby bonus as well as other measures, but it seems that the middle class are not enjoying the other benefits accorded to families with newborn. For example, priority allocation of PRH or subsidized sales flat. So for families with newborn, which belong to the middle class, the government should give them more tax allowances and give them a better home loan deal to encourage them to buy home, as well as give them healthcare vouchers and an education voucher to alleviate their pressure. The middle class has fallen through the gap. They have a decent income, but they have to pay huge amounts of tax, and the burden is huge. Now, with the uncertainty in the economies, the prospects for the middle class is gloomy. Their life is not as happy as we think. So in terms of a support package, we should give them a more targeted one to help them. I support the motion and the amendments. Mr. Ambrose Lam. President, when I look at the handset of previous council meetings, throughout the years, every time when members mentioned more help for the middle class, the government would make the excuse that there is no universally accepted definition for the middle class and that long-term planning is needed. Then they muddle the water and drag their feet. We have to keep coming back on this topic because we are not happy with your answer. We have to pester you enough so that you take actions. We are trying to boost the economy. The ultimate target is to improve people's life. Well, if we are increasing our GDP without improving people's living standard, that is meaningless. There is not a universally accepted definition for middle class in the international community, but it doesn't mean that we can't have our own definition for it. Now, in the 1970s, there was the happiness index. I think there is a agreed definition for middle class among us. I think we have to establish a middle class commission to define the middle class so that we can establish a fair platform for development of the middle class. Now, an oval-shaped society is the most ideal one. However, the policies formulated by governments in emerging markets are usually focused on the poor. The middle class is being squeezed and the societies are becoming M-shaped. The middle class is angry. The middle class are not eligible for PRH or subsidized sales flags. They have to purchase their own flags, but they can't afford it. So they have to live in the periphery of the urban areas. The transportation cost is expensive. They can't afford a car, and even if they can, they can't afford a parking space. And they have to take care of the old and the young in their families. They can't afford a major operation in the private sector, and even if they do have a medical insurance plan, after a claim, the premium would hike. Now, in the end, they have to seek help from the public sector, and then the governments would end up paying for the extra cost. Now, in face of the injustice they faced, the middle class has nowhere to turn to. Now, the rich can afford a lawyer, same for the grassroots because of the legal aid. However, the middle class is not eligible for it. Now, the assets limit is $430,000 for legal aid. The middle class would definitely not qualify for it. Now, it is impossible for most middle-class people to pay off their own pockets to hire a lawyer through litigation. The government assumes that the middle class has their own savings and they don't need help, but that's not the case. The income level for the middle class seems to be decent, but their living standard can be worse than the grassroots. Now, with the upcoming budget on the horizon, I hope that the Financial Secretary would identify room for offering more help for the middle class. I so submit to support the motion and the amendment. Mr. Kisson Yang. President, I speak in support of the motion moved by Mr. Lee Chun-keung, that is to address the needs of the middle class. We first need to define middle class to know about their needs. There are different interpretations of the word. How much income would qualify one as a middle class? A house, a car? Now, many people mention the definition laid down by the OECD. I will not repeat it. According to this definition, for anyone earning between $25,000 and $65,000 in Hong Kong, they would qualify as middle class. Well, what pressure are they facing? Now, let's say a household is earning $60,000 a month. They spend $12,000 in mortgage and $20,000 on elderly health care, and then foreign domestic helper and utilities at $5,000 and $5,000 for tuition fees and $5,000 for extracurricular activities, and then rates and property management fees. Well, you better hope that you don't get sick. And then there is the taxman. They are very careful in making spending. They save up a lot. There are middle-class people who live on uphill areas because they want to save up transportation costs. They choose to walk to work. Now, in the private sector, you need $3,000 to $4,000 each time you see a specialist. And according to the employment ordinance, you only enjoy 4 days of sick leave per month. If you take more than 3 days of sick leave per year, then you lose the reward. So people would soldier through any sickness. Now, we have more and more poor middle class. These people have a living standard similar to those of the grassroots. The Financial Secretary should think about how to give the middle class some breathing space. Or we should lower the tax on the personal assessments and salaries to $10,000. Now, can we relax the threshold for child tax allowance? Can we extend the newborn baby bonus to families giving birth to babies last year? What about the tax allowance for dependent parents and children, and also tax allowance for self-education? They haven't been adjusted since 4 years ago. Can we have a progressive child tax allowance to give more help to families with more babies? And what about the tax deduction for expenses of employing foreign domestic helpers? We hope the government to introduce a tax allowance for medical and education expenditure on children, as well, or even a healthcare voucher scheme for the middle class. The government should also foster a family-friendly working culture. On sick leaves, many corporations are willing to let their employees to take more sick leaves. Now, in European countries, there are laws to protect employees' rights to get a rest. We are vying for talents everywhere to attract more talents to come to Hong Kong. We have to allow employees to go offline from the eyes of the employers. We should increase the number of paternity leaves, enhance its durations, as well as introducing more measures to help employees strike a balance between work and family. The middle class is the pillar of our economy. We must understand the needs of the middle class. In policy formulation, we have to think more about middle class. With a strong middle class, the Hong Kong economy can be robust. I support the motion.
Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, President. Addressing the needs of the middle class is an important subject. Since the first day as I took office, I moved this motion on creating an olive society or olive-shaped society. The reason for that is that the middle class is the stabilizing force of the society. The most ideal shape of society is an olive-shaped society. That is, a society that is smaller on both ends and swells in the middle. To create this olive-shaped society, the most important factor is the upward mobility opportunities. To provide ample opportunities for upward mobility, we need to foster the workforce. There are two conditions. First, internal factor. Middle class and grassroots families take reference from each other. The middle class rely on themselves. They contribute much with few welfare benefits. As long as their quality of life is better than the grassroots family, they will have the motivation to move upward. To motivate the working class, there is another external factor. We have to make sure that the channel for upward mobility is clear. So we need two ladders, including housing ladders for people to move up and occupational or job ladder. We need to allow people this hope to move upwards to become middle class. I would like to talk about some of the housing issues in Hong Kong. It is a deep-seated conflict that we have. The government focuses its resources on building public rental housing. We have a 7-to-3 ratio. 70% of the resources is on public rental housing, 30% on subsidized sale flat. We don't lack public rental housing, but we need a housing ladder above public housing. There are 30% of the population in Hong Kong living in the public rental housing that is highest in this Asia. Say for Singapore, South Korea, their percentage stands at single digit. For UK, it stands at 20%. There are 30% of the population living in public rental housing. While we are striving to build even more public rental housing, the percentage of the demand increase stands at 80%. The reason why that happens is that we have stopped building subsidized sale flat for 10 years. Still, we have a shortage of supply. We don't have a tier of housing between the private market and the public housing. That is why the poor middle class is expanding. This gap in the housing ladder brings about different challenges. There are downward mobility of the middle class. Some middle class try to control their expenses and lower their income in order to qualify for public rental housing. There are 90% of the public rental housing that don't have a turnover. The lack of turnover, coupled with the subdivided units, it creates problems. And the workforce is shrinking because public rental housing limits the workforce in Hong Kong. That is why the expenses on welfare of the government keep rising. So we have to create this housing ladder to change from building public housing to building a subsidized sale flat or other types of housing. I think that we should change the ratio of 7-to-3 to 5-to-5. Apart from housing ladder, we need a job ladder. I will not touch on that today. President, the middle class needs our support and concern. We cannot create a middle class by providing them with welfare benefits. the fiscal situation of the government does not allow us to provide tax concessions. The most important thing is to create a housing ladder and a job ladder for the middle class so that they can move upward and have hopes. Dr. Teck Chi-yun. Thank you. President. A few days ago, I met with a young nurse at my office. They are trying to move to or emigrate to Australia. I asked them whether they can still qualify for a nurse in Australia and ask about the salary that they will earn in Australia. They told me that they can continue to serve as a nurse in Australia and they don't have to take any further test or examination. As for income, after tax deductions, the salary is half of that in Hong Kong. I thought the discrepancy was staggering. I did not ask them about the reason for immigration because different people have different reasons for that. All along, the middle class has been a cornerstone for the society. They comprise of nurses, social workers, different professionals, including and civil servants. They drive the economic development of society. The middle class is a sandwich class in Hong Kong. They contribute significantly to society with few welfare benefits. But still, they are the facilitator of our community. There are three characteristics to the middle class in Hong Kong. First, they are self-reliant. Through their own effort, they try to further educate themselves and earn licenses and become qualified as professionals and create better conditions for their families. Second, they concern about the community and they take part in different social work. They concern about the environment. They want to create a caring and healthy society for the next generation. Third, the middle class has an international outlook or perspective, and they take part in international affairs and help the disadvantaged people in other communities so that Hong Kong plays the roles in the international arena. The middle class needs hope and opportunities. The middle class today is unhappy. They say that Hong Kong is no longer the same. We have limited freedom, and the government is not willing to listen to the people, and they have lost hope for the future. The nurse that I mentioned told me that about 10 to 20% of their friends have emigrated. Some of them are planning for it. I tried to encourage the nurse to stay behind in Hong Kong, but I could not come up with any of that. I could only bid her farewell. There are a lot of old friends and colleagues of mine who have left Hong Kong. I could only hear about them through Facebook. When they left Hong Kong, I bid farewell to them and asked them to take care of themselves. Today, I would like to tell these friends who have left that Hong Kong is in need of their support. I hope that they will come back. Thank you. Mr. Tang Fei. President, I speak in support of the motion moved by Mr. Lee Chun-keung and the amendment moved by other member. Hong Kong, mainland, and the Taiwan statistics show that education is one of the challenges faced by the middle class, including on income, housing expenses, and other expenses. These can be alleviated through tax measures, but for education, it's difficult for it to be eased by financial measures because the middle class takes up a large amount of a percentage in Hong Kong. As with other mature societies, Hong Kong is an olive-shaped society, so there are not many super rich and super poor people in Hong Kong. The middle class takes up a large amount of portion in society. But for our education, we adopt this elite education system. We have a Band 1 school system in Hong Kong, and we rank students in Hong Kong in different tiers. So for the first 33% of students in Hong Kong, they are considered Band 1 students. For schools accepting all these Band 1 students, they are considered Band 1 schools. But the middle class accounts for over half of our population. To meet the lowest university entrance requirements of DSE 3322, that accounts for about 40% of the students. But only 20 to 30% of them can enter the universities in Hong Kong. The ratio for entering top-notch programs in the university is even lower. That is far lower than the percentage of middle class in our population. That is why the middle class has high hopes for their children. They cannot enter Band 1 schools through traditional study at school. Only very few of them can achieve that. And because of that, many middle-class families are worried that their children cannot enter Band 1 schools or traditional elite schools. If we do not take into account international schools, only 21 schools in Hong Kong are considered traditional elite schools in Hong Kong. So the middle class has to take other measures. They pay high tuition fee to allow their children to enter international schools, private schools, or even send their children to other countries. Many parents in Asia think that as long as their children enter top-notch schools, their future would be smooth. That is the result of the experience of the previous generation. But nowadays, even if people enter elite schools, it does not mean that they can secure a good job. So the experience of the previous generation cannot be a reference for the next generation. We are faced with this age of artificial intelligence. It affects the education of schools. The DSE that we have focus on memorization of materials. That is outdated. We need to focus on critical skills and creativity of students. So why young people want to work as slash? Because they are prepared for the new age. To alleviate the concern of the middle class on education, we need to reform the system. On the introduction of artificial intelligence courses proposed by the government, I think that it is a good thing. I hope that it can be deepened. Education is one of the concern of the middle class. President, I so submit.
Mr. Shou Chang-wing. Now, going by the OECD's definition, the middle class is defined as those of income that's 75% or 200% of the median national income. Now, according to our household survey, the median income is $29,500 in Hong Kong in 2023. So that shows that the middle class in Hong Kong will mean those who have income of between $22,000 and $59,000 per month. Now, if you ask people in that income bracket if they agree they are the middle class, I believe most of them will not dare to say so. Because for those with in that income bracket, most of them under heavy pressure, paying mortgage or high rent, they're struggling to survive. Now, there's a report on housing affordability in 2023, and Hong Kong has the most unaffordable housing market. The median property price is 18.8 times of the median income. And then in recent years, the increase in median income is only 60%. As for private property prices, the increase was 429%. Domestic rent increase was 114%. Now, middle class used to mean people who lead a comfortable life. They are not rich like the really rich, and they don't need welfare benefits also. But now, for the middle class, they are suffering. They are going for downward mobility. In 2023, the government sent out over 7 million tax demand notes and a decrease of 440,000 notes. And the middle class accounts for more than 60% of the population. So we need to stay alert. If we see a declining the middle class, that means we'll see structural changes in Hong Kong. That's why I support, I think it's good to have this discussion on Mr. Lee Chun-keung's original motion, Mr. Frankie YICK's amendment. Now, the middle class is an important force for economic development. It's also the stabilizing force for the community. So when the government considers various welfare policies, they must not overlook the need for short-term relief measures for the middle class, so we could boost the size of the middle class. Now, as the government considers welfare benefits for the grassroots sector, the government should also consider the need to offer some tax deductions to the middle class for healthcare expenses, children's education expenses, and expenses in supporting their parents and so on. And the government should also speed up the building of subsidized housing and low-price starter homes, so more in the middle class are able to own their homes. There must also be loans and other financial support to help the middle class to start a business. This will help to boost upward mobility. Now, the government is trying to boost economic development and help the people, and the government is also taking care of the low-income class. The government, but at the same time, the government needs to consider the needs of the middle class. So there's need for diversity government policies. Thank you. Ms. Eunice Young. Thank you. I thank Mr. Lee